It's not a very good deal. But in the age of Black Lives Matter, our leaders don't have to answer for this. They just give speeches about social justice and they're insulated from all criticism. If you persist in bothering them about their incompetence, they'll have you arrested for hate crimes. So revolution is the best thing that ever happened to our political class. You see it with perfect clarity in New York City. Just a few months ago, Mayor Bill de Blasio was a national joke. Now de Blasio is his generation's Al Sharpton. He's a protest leader fighting in the streets for civil rights. He no longer has to pretend to run the city. Meanwhile, de Blasio's public schools are failing. In New York, the biggest school system in the country, fewer than half the students are proficient in English and math. That's a disaster, for the students themselves most of all. Why is it happening? City officials don't want to talk about that. Acknowledging the problem might require doing something about it. Their donors in the teachers' unions oppose change of any kind, unless it's a raise. Now leaders in New York City don't have to address their failing schools. Instead of helping kids to learn, the city can just blame racism. Racism might seem like a strange explanation in New York. The school population there is fully 84% non-white. There aren't that many white kids to blame. But that hasn't stopped the school chancellor. He recently issued a statement pledging his commitment to anti-racism and to work every day to undo these systems of injustice. The chancellor wasn't more specific than that. He didn't specify which systems of injustice he was talking about. Maybe that's because the kids with the highest test scores in New York are not white. They're Asian. Asian students score far higher than any other ethnic group in New York City, not just higher scores in math, but also higher in English proficiency. That seems odd. So many of these students come from poor immigrant families where no one speaks English at home. At first glance, kids like this don't seem to have much privilege. So how are they so successful? Racism, obviously. There's no other possible explanation for it. But it must be a very stealthy kind of racism. Indeed, this is an especially diabolical strain of racism, one that helps non-white immigrant kids most of all. It is a system of injustice that allows penniless foreigners from faraway countries to arrive here with no language skills whatsoever and still shoot to the top of the academic rankings. Obviously, what we're dealing with here, ladies and gentlemen, is systemic racism at its most systemic. The mayor's wife is in charge of fixing problems like this. She is the city's systemic racism czar. But in the end, Mrs. de Blasio wasn't any more specific than the school chancellor had been about what's happening here. She didn't explain how this kind of diabolical racism actually works.